What is up, gunfighters? Hopefully welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Today is another cartridge talk. Better know a cartridge. So, you love 9mm, but you love 10mm. What is a gunfighter to do? Put them in a bag, shake them up, turn it upside down, and see what falls out. The 9x25 Dillon. Yes, it's been done. Necking down a 10mm to a 9mm. You might know we'll save the rest of this for the cartridge talk. I'll plug in the bio. You can skip it if you want. If you've already heard it, you can skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds. And you can hear about the 9x25 Dillon. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in His very own image, a follower of Jesus Christ, a simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with LAPD. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an FBI certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector, pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table starting when I was a child. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts. Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. super powerful pistol cartridge, the 9x25 Dillon. The 10 millimeter length neck down to 9 millimeter. Now, you're probably familiar with the 9 millimeter and its European designation, the 9x19, which you can deduce means that the case is 19 millimeters long. Well, the 9x25 case is 25 millimeters long, and you can surmise from that there is a lot more powder capacity in that cartridge than the 9x19. Think of it, if you thought of it in rifle terms, if you think of like the 30-06 is a standard, then you got your 300 Win Mag, and then you have something like your 300 Remington Ultra Mag, like it's your Magnum. You consider your 9x19 your standard, and you were to consider your 38 Super your 9mm Magnum, this is like your 9mm Magnum. Developed for use for USPSA and IPSC. And if you're not familiar with that, if you listen to the bio, you know that I've done quite a bit of competition shooting. Quite a bit of that was in USPSA, United States Practical Shooting Association. There are a lot of rules in that, and a lot of people think those guys shoot like powder puff loads, like easy loads. Well, if you're doing it right and following the rules, you should be shooting to a certain power factor, and certain divisions, this one designed for open division, gives you, well, limited and open, but either way, they give you more points for more powerful cartridges for a given hit. And there's a lot that goes into that, the target, A zone, B zone, C zone hits. I'm not going to get into all that to confuse you, but this was made to be a powerful cartridge for that application. As I understand, it may have been too powerful. The rumor of the 9x25 Dillon, as the legend goes, it was so powerful that the compensators that they were running on open guns, it actually forced the gun down when you shot. Most guns rise up with a compensator that kind of tries to counteract that and makes the muzzle rise less. Well, this gun had so much powder that the rumor has it that it actually was too powerful and drove the gun down, which is not what you want. You want the gun to stay as still as possible so you can get faster follow-up shots. You don't want it to rise up, which it's usually going to do, and you don't want it to dip down. So too powerful if there is such a thing in a pistol cartridge, for what it was designed for anyway. But the 9x25 is a cool cartridge nonetheless. The 9x25, let's look here. Parent case 10mm auto. Obviously, it shoots a 9mm grain bullet. Let's look at some ballistics. You ever watch the original Batman? What does he say, crazy or nuts? He's like, you want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. Let's get there on some ballistics. 90 grain bullet. Now, this is from Wikipedia, because it's not even listed. It's so obscure, it's not even in my reloading manual. I'm aware of its existence. That's why I looked it up today. I actually went on Ogden to look it up because they have a ton of cartridges. If you are not aware of that resource, Ogden has a ton of reloading data, but even they didn't have this one listed. So Wikipedia does have it. A 90 grain bullet, a gold dot, no less, jacketed hollow point at 2,100 feet a second. 2,100 feet a second. That is close to rifle velocities. Now, it's a little bit lighter bullet, but that'll tell you what kind of cartridge this is. 2,100 feet a second. Let's go to typical 9mm loading. You're looking at 115 grain at 1,800 feet a second. 1,800 feet a second. Looking at a 147 at 1495. Those are some high velocities. If you're not familiar, I skipped one. The 125 grain it lists at 1,700 feet per second. Now, I'm not sure what test gun they used, and barrel length has a lot to do with ballistics, and all of that plays into this, but those are some crazy high numbers. Your standard 9mm 147, which is one of my go-to loads, is going to be subsonic, and it's going to be around the 900 and some feet per second. $900 and some, versus the loading for this at $14.95. And a good rule of thumb for a lot of 9mm cartridges is you're right around 350 to 400 foot-pounds. And these are just numbers on a formula sheet. They may or may not translate into real-world effectiveness. But that being said, a lot of these are in the 800 and above foot-pounds. The loads that we listed, the majority of them are in the 800 and above foot-pounds. From 300 to maybe 400 on a hot load in a 9mm to over 800 in most of these loads. So that's a giant leap forward. That's a much bigger step forward than going from like a 30-06 to a 300 Win Mag. That may be more akin from going to like a 30-30 to a 300 Win Mag, to give you an idea of how powerful this pistol cartridge is. This says that this cartridge can hold as much powder as a 38 Super, which is already more powerful than a 9mm, to give you some idea. So, this was developed in the late 80s per my one source, and by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established. So go back and confirm this if you really care. But developed in the late 80s, the power factor was higher then in open division than it is now, so they lowered it. So this, I don't think, ever really caught on because it was either too powerful or just so much more powerful than is needed. Also, I didn't see this in my research, but just reasoning through it from what I know about USPSA competitions, they don't limit the number of rounds you can have, they limit the length your magazine has to be. And a 38 Super, if it can make major power factor, since it's a thinner case than this would be, because it's a necked case, if they say you can have 170 millimeter, which I think is the correct length if I remember off the top of my head, they say you can have 170 millimeter length magazine for open division, you could fit more 38 Super than you can 9x25 Dillon. So, for that reason, I think it kind of went away for competition shooting, so fell into obscurity. But that doesn't make it a bad cartridge. If you're listening to this and this isn't your first one, you probably like these obscure cartridges. So what would this be great for? It'd be great for anything you want a Magnum pistol cartridge for. And a lot of times when you're going to go for a heavy-hitting cartridge, you're going to step up to, that 357 Magnum, 44 Magnum. You got to go with a revolver. The only other one in this realm is going to be a 357 SIG. So let's compare some numbers. Those are in my reloading manual. I would like to compare apples to apples, but I don't feel like looking everything up on the fancy Google search machine. I'm going to look it up in the reloading manual, but it'll give you some rough numbers to see how this compares to some of those other cartridges. Now, your most common loading and the 357 SIG, probably even the 357 Magnum, is going to be your 124, 125 grain. Within 1 grain of that, it's a real common 9mm loading as well. The 357 SIG is launching that projectile, per my manual, a very hot load at 1350. If you recall, the 9x25 Dillon is launching that at 1,700 feet a second. It's not even close. If you look at the 357 Magnum, that's a real common loading. Again, that's kind of known as, especially a defensive load, that 125 grain bullet. And probably looking around 14 to 1450 feet a second, depending on barrel length and a bunch of other stuff. But comparable sized guns. And again, the 9x25 Dillon is 1,700 feet a second. Again, that's crazy. Crazy numbers from that kind of cartridge. Now, you're really comparing apples to oranges when you're talking about that versus the 44, because the 44 Magnum, you're talking about a much heavier bullet. There, you're generally talking about a 240 grain. I believe that was the original loading and probably still the most common. You're looking at a 240 grain bullet at 1,400. So it's lower velocity than the velocity we just talked about, but you're comparing a 240 grain bullet to a 125 grain bullet. So a different ballpark, different things. I would still say the 44 mag is a better big game hunting cartridge for anything bigger than deer. But this is, 357 Magnum is plenty big enough for deer size game. And as we showed, the 9x25 Dillon is quite a bit hotter than that. Not only that, but Maybe you don't want to hunt with a revolver. Maybe you like continuity of training. Maybe you train with an auto loader. You really like the big frame Glocks, or if you're a little bit... Anyway, I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to make fun of any of the gun community today. If you really like the 1911 or the Glock, any of those big frame ones, because remember, this is based off a 10 millimeter. So, just like the 40 Smith & Wesson was designed for the same overall length of a 9 millimeter, the 357 SIG is basically the same length as the 40 and the 9 millimeter. They can all be in the same kind of framed gun. In fact, for my go-to carry gun most of the time, my SIG 226, I have a 9mm barrel, I have a 40 Smith & Wesson barrel, and a 357 SIG barrel. But beefing that up, the 10mm, I don't know if it was designed this way or coincidental. Don't think at first the Bren 10, I don't think that was like a 45 that they changed into a 10mm, but I think they saw the wisdom and the commonality probably of keeping it the same basic length as a 45 ACP, which means a lot of your classic 45 ACP guns, you could get probably a custom barrel. You could get a custom barrel for your 1911s for 9x25 Dillon. Now with the 1911, you'd probably want to get one that was in 10mm and go to 9x25 Dillon because you're going to have the same slide and everything. But I don't see why that would be a hard thing to do. You may also need a recoil spring, but those are like $10, and a new barrel. And if you already have a 10mm 1911, which is what would be cool in, you could get your awesome, super tactical retro Colt Delta Elite and 9x25 Dillon, and that'd be a sweet piece to carry. Also, if you're a Glocky, you like Glocks, whatever name you want to apply to people that like Glocks, you could get the Glock 20, I believe is the Glock 20 is the full size, 10mm, or really any of the Glocks based on the 10mm, and probably get a conversion barrel for 9x25 Dillon. Again, you may or may not need a different recoil spring, but the recoil springs are really cheap. Once you get the barrel, should use the same mags and everything else, and you get the 9x25 Dillon. So maybe you want something a little bit different than that 10mm. You really like the 10mm, you really like the 9mm. You want to combine them. You get the 9x25 Dillon, which, reminds me that I didn't actually check it compared to the 10mm auto. So let us reconnoiter here in this reloading manual and see how that compares. 10mm auto, the powerful handgun round. Probably by far the most common loading for that is going to be your 180 grain, and the manual I have lists that at 1250. 180 grains at 1250 versus what do we say, the 125 grain at 1700 feet a second. So do you want a heavier bullet going considerably slower, or do you want a lighter, faster bullet going considerably faster? And that's kind of one of the debates we always have in the handgun world. You can see that even in a microcosm in the 9mm world. Do you want a 115 grain bullet going faster, or do you want a 147 grain bullet going a little slower? Which one of those do you prefer? For me, more importantly, which one of those does my gun prefer? And then which one do I prefer as far as recoil goes? So it really just depends on you. But this cartridge, if you want to push a 9mm projectile screaming fast, maybe you want to hunt deer or coyote with your 1911, and you don't want to go the 10mm route. Maybe you live in Arizona or somewhere where you may have a lot longer shots, and you want the lighter, faster bullet as opposed to the heavier, slower moving projectile for that reason. The 9x25 Dillon. Maybe you want to put a Wilson Combat compensator on the end of your 1911 and run the 9x25 Dillon and see if it does in fact push the muzzle down. Maybe you're accustomed to shooting low left on your target and you think that is a good way to counteract that. You'll be trying to push the gun up instead of down. And if you shoot 100 rounds like that and 100 rounds regular, it should equal, right? And you should be dead on center bullseye. I'm just kidding. I don't think that's how that works. It was just a joke. But for whatever reason, You may or may not choose the 9x25 Dillon. At least now you know that it exists, and you probably know more about it than when you started today. I certainly did. There might be a few guys out there that know a lot more about the 9x25 Dillon, but it's a cartridge that a lot of people don't even know exists. But it does. And hopefully now you better know a cartridge. I appreciate you listening to these cartridge talks. If you want to contact me or leave a comment or anything like that, or just want more, you can check out goodshepherdtraining.com. If you own a 9x25 Dillon, I'd like to hear from you. I primarily put these out as podcasts. If you listen on YouTube, hopefully you'll give podcasts a try and check us out on iTunes or Spotify or whatever. With that as a thanks for staying tuned through all of that. A podcast about a cartridge you may never even see in real life. The tactical tip of the day is a reloading manual. Even if you don't reload, if you reload, you probably have a reloading manual. But even if you don't, if you like this kind of stuff, which I assume you do because you've listened up until now, and you want to learn about a bunch of different cartridges, pick up an old reloading manual. It doesn't have to be new. It can be a couple of years old. They come out with new ones all the time, but that probably doesn't matter to you. Get one that's a few years old on eBay, does Amazon still sell used books? I think so. They sell so much other stuff. But anyway, look for a good cheap one. Hornady's the one that I just happen to have, but a bunch of bullet manufacturers and people make the reloading manuals, Lyman. Get one and look through it, especially if you're looking for that next gun, to compare different cartridges. I think that's probably where you should start if you're looking at I'm looking for a deer rifle. Instead of saying, I want a, Browning Z-Bolt, which doesn't exist, but maybe that's their next model. I want a Browning Z-Bolt in super ultra mega gray wolf Cerakote or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with liking a certain style of rifle or anything like that. But probably the most important choice you start out with is, what caliber do I want it in? And looking at different calibers and things like that can come in quite handy. Then once you settle on that, maybe deciding what make and model of rifle. I want a push feed. I want a controlled round feed. I want this thing. I want that thing. You've got to have a detachable magazine, or I absolutely do not want a detachable box magazine. I want an internal magazine so I don't lose it in the field. Whatever that is. But start with the cartridge. Just be like, I want a whatever brand X rifle, and whatever they have it in the sporting goods store, it's in 30-06, that's cool. Not that there's anything wrong with 30-06, just did a episode on that not too long ago. It's a great cartridge, but maybe that's not what you want. Maybe you want to hunt pronghorn. Maybe 25-06 is a better cartridge for you. And something that might help you learn that is an old reloading manual. Anyway, with that, I appreciate you listening till the end of the episode. Today's tactical verse of the day. Some of God's rules on deadly force. Anyone who strikes a person with a fatal blow is to be put to death. However, if it is not done intentionally, but God lets it happen, they are to flee to a place I will designate. But if anyone schemes and kills someone deliberately, that person is to be taken from my altar and put to death. Now that's talking about a difference between manslaughter and the cities of refuge they may flee to, and murder. Thou shalt not murder. Manslaughter is different. You can look up other verses on that. That one is coming from Exodus 21. But especially if you're going to carry a gun in any kind of defensive manner, you ought to know when God says it's okay to kill and not to kill. The commandment is not thou shalt not kill, it's thou shalt not murder. So you probably should know what murder is. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.